Continuation of community lecture, more or less, but communities are regularly changing over time and thus are dynamic entities. Each community has its own developmental history with its particular prevailing environment and time. The sources of studying the growth and development of ecological community can be a barren area. The development of the community initiates an arrival of the propagules or their parent organisms to the area of study. Out of all the immigrating organisms or propagules, only few of them survive, grow, and gets established at the new site. The first developmental stage of the community is called as the pioneering community, which are which is made up of those few successfully survived and established organisms or their propagules. As more and more new species immigrates to these sites, the competition for the resources become more intense between them. Due to the activities of the survived species and physiography and constant change in the climatic conditions, the prevailing environmental conditions keep on changing. The nature works on the principle of survival of the fittest, and this supports only those organisms which adapts and fits best to the changing environmental conditions. And until the community becomes incomplete accordance with the environment and become a relatively stable community, the process of development and change in community continues. The changes occurring during the entire process of community development is ordered and highly directional. This highly directional and sequences changes in the community are called the succession. History of the study of succession. Europeans have already described the coastal dunes related succession when in 1899 Henry Cowles got inspired from this study and started his journey on sand dunes along Lake Michigan. He defined the laws essential to the changing patterns of the community and influenced many ecologists of new generation. He viewed plant communities and documented that these communities differ in the underlying physical environment and species composition and are dynamic in nature. The plant communities in sand dunes were studied at different ages in order to reflect the pattern of changes in the community over time. Since then, many other ecologists, along with Cowles, studied the succession process by using the chronosequence approach. This temporal approach to study succession process is difficult to follow for centuries or decades and is replaced by another approach that uses spatial differences between communities to infer the occurrence of succession. Spatial differences means locations of different ages are compared to understand the process of succession. SIR is defined as the stage in the succession sequence. Ecologists identified animals as the factors that affect the rate and direction of succession along with the different patterns of succession. All the taxonomical groups such as rodents, fish, protozoans and insects and all types of ecosystems such as marine or aquatic etc. are being investigated to study succession. Ecological succession and types. Primary and secondary succession. In ecology, the community structure evolves over time and the process of this progress is termed as ecological succession. Over a period of time, the replacement of one population or community by another is called as succession. The sequence of change in the type of community sequentially relates different community types and describes the landform or soil or other site succession and vegetation succession. Ecological succession is majorly categorized into primary and secondary succession based on the association between individuals with their biotic and abiotic factors. Ecologists suggest two types of succession process, primary and secondary succession. Primary succession, the establishment of a community in an area never been habitated by organisms over to no prior existence of life is evidenced. The presence of complete lifeless empty area may be because of greater natural disasters such as lava flow, sand dunes, or via glaciers, newly introduced rocks, etc. Over a period of time, few living organisms manage to sustain life in these empty areas, and with continuous succession, variety of life forms begins to grow in the area. Secondary succession. The more common type of succession is secondary succession, where the existed life forms of community are partially destroyed by small scale disturbances, for example forest wildfire. For a period of time with remaining nutrients in environment, the area remains empty, but gradually life begins to reappear and communities change over time. In both type of succession, the sizes, intensities, and frequency of change in species vary within communities, while altering the area of habitat, leading to mixture of species exploring the prevailing conditions of community. The species evolved life histories in a partially predictable sequential way and leads to gradual progressive changes in species composing the community. Initially, in the unfavorable environmental conditions of these disturbed habitat, only a few species form the surrounding areas invade and then they modify the habitat by alterations such as soil component decompositions, amount of sunlight or shades on grounds, etc. The first community established in an originally completely lifeless land is called pioneer community, and the plants and animals are called pioneer plants or animals. After these successive changes in habitat environment, a stable community is achieved, termed as climax, dominated by few prominent species. The community with this stable state of equilibrium is termed as climax community. This climax community is characterized by stable environmental conditions, limiting any further admission of other species in, in the community. At each successive community, the replacing species are more complex. Other than climax community, other communities at the time of succession undergo small-scale environmental disturbances, thereby offering species diversity with equal probability of each species to become dominant. Stages of ecological succession. Stages of ecological succession. A process of ecological changes where established communities are replaced by more evolved natural communities is called as succession. Depending on the type of area over which succession has to take place, mainly two types of succession occurred: primary and secondary succession. Primary, when completely lifeless bare areas start succession, it is called as primary succession. Secondary succession, when succession starts from an area which has been once occupied by vegetation but become vegetation free due to some disturbance. The mechanism is called as denudation or secondary succession. The disturbances can be because of strong winds, fire, rains, and cultivation. The stages of ecological process of primary succession include following stages like nudation. Nudation is a stage occurred when greater disturbances lead to formation of a bare land uninhabited by any plant or animal species. The disturbing factors can be biotic because of human activities or abiotic like climatic conditions like fire, hails, glaciations, etc. or topographic, wind action, soil erosion, etc. This uninhabited land can sustain only autotrophic species consuming inorganic substances and offering a new environmental condition for inhabitation of newer species. For instance, rocks are break down to soil with the help of acidic substances secretion by lichens. These lichens act as pioneer species in the community. Then migration or invasion. Migration is a two-way direction movement or mechanism of dispersal and a group characteristic feature of population. The reproductive propagules such as spores, seeds, etc. migrate for the species establishment into a new area. Non-native organisms called invasive species enter from a neighboring environment and spread widely in a community. These invasive species are responsible for community disturbances and thus are threat to the stable ecosystem, but in the succession process they aid in altering the environmental conditions such as soil composition, function and texture. Our strategists with high fecundity rate and high dispersal rate are the first colonizers. 3. Ecosis. On the basis of soil composition, the initial establishment. Nudation was the first step. Nudation, then migration or invasion. Migration is a two-way directional movement or mechanism of dispersal and a group characteristic feature of population. The reproductive propagules such as spores, seeds, etc. migrate for the species establishment into a new area. Non-invasive organisms called invasive species. Non-native organisms called invasive species enter from the neighboring environment and spread widely in a community. And these invasive species are responsible for community disturbances and thus are a threat to the stable ecosystem, but in the succession process they aid in altering the environment conditions such as soil composition, function and structure, texture. Are strategies with high fecundity rate and high dispersal rate are the first colonizers. Then ekisis on the basis of soil composition and the initial establishment of community is called colonization. The initial community proliferate abundantly. Allogenic mechanisms of succession are those which are completely driven by the abiotic factors. Allogenic means abiotic. Ekisis happens when different environment mediated and completely regulate the ekisis process. Ekisis happens when try to learn to pronounce this word properly with the help of some search engines. Happens when different pioneer species are sustained after dispersal in an area. They have different germination, growth and reproduction rates, and that's why the pioneer species take much longer time and gradual replacement of other species. By the establishment of these pioneer species, the texture and composition of soil changes, which leads to germination of seeds already present there but were not able to germinate. Then aggregation. The established species in the area increases in population, and this increase in population density is called as aggregation. So first nudation happens, then migration, then ekisis, next aggregation. I hope it's correct. Nudation, migration or invasion, ekisis, aggregation. Yeah, that's right. Allogenic what mechanisms? Aggregation. The established species in the area increases in population, and this increase in population density is called as aggregation. As an example, in most successions of plant communities, small herbs is being replaced by shrubs, and further inhabitants are supported by this as a source of food. Then competition. As a result of aggregation, then comes competition. Competition happens. Few pioneer and initial species got established and increase in population, which further leads to enhanced intra-specific and interspecific competition among the species. This stage of competition is for the resource utilization like shelter, nutrients, water, etc. Plants and animal species both exhibit the stage of competition and leads to either competitive exclusion, where no two species utilizing same resources can coexist, or a resource partitioning, where two competitive species share their part of resources and then coexist. Reaction. The established species in the habitat modify the environmental conditions and consequently leads to gradual replacement of older species by newer ones, as the conditions are now become unfavorable for the survival of older species. This type of succession include autogenic mechanism driven by the biotic factors, in which existing species themselves modify the environmental conditions, offering harsh conditions for their own survival. Pioneer colonizers facilitate the colonization of mature case-selected species. Competition happen. Reaction is the next stage. Reaction. The established species in the habitat modify the environmental conditions, subsequently leads to gradual replacement of older species by newer ones, as the conditions are now become unfavorable for the survival of older species. This type of succession include autogenic mechanism driven by the biotic factors, in which existing species themselves modify the environmental conditions, offering harsh conditions for their own survival. Pioneer colonizers facilitate the colonization of mature K-selected species. Stabilization. The mechanism of climax community colonization is termed as stabilization. Next, stabilization. After reaction, there comes stabilization. The mechanism of climax community colonization is termed as stabilization. Here is where climax community stabilizes. Climax community is a final state of equilibrium, stable, self-perpetuating and mature stage of succession. The entire community is now being supported by the altered abiotic factors, chemical and physical conditions. Climax community, generally made up of K-selected species, adapts according to the area of succession. Here also K-selected succession and well established until any further external disturbances. The structure, composition and energy flow is very much specific for climax community and thus represent a well adapted steady state of equilibrium. The general pattern of ecological succession occurring in a community is depicted. The process of secondary succession is almost similar to primary succession except some steps. Also, as secondary succession starts from an initial stage or state already enriched in soil nutrients, and the process occurs at much faster rate than primary succession. The limiting factor in secondary succession is the disturbances. Both type of succession resulted into stable and steady state of ecological equilibrium called climax community. So the process starts with nudation, migration where are selected selection is more seen, then ectasis, then aggregation, competition, reactions, stabilization. Aggregation. Okay, climax community present. Succession follows general patterns. Grasses, herbs, forbs, shrubs, seedlings, shrubs, popular trees, pines, oaks, hardwoods. Different types of succession in plants. Halosphere. If the plant's succession starts from saline water or salty soil, it is called halosphere. Hydrosphere, hydrarch is when succession of plants start from aquatic environment and subsequent changes in the vegetation is called hydrosphere or hydrarch. Xerarch, xeroarch or xerosphere. When the vegetation starts from a dry land, the process of succession is called the xerosphere or xeroarch. The two types of xeroarch are lithosphere, succession when begins from rock surfaces, then Samosia. Samosia, it is the succession that occurs on sandy habitats. Cerule, if succession starts from decaying woods, tree barks, etc., it is called as cerule. Cerule, decaying woods. Okay. It includes microorganism succession such as fungi or bacteria. All sphere ends into mesic community irrespective of succession type. Always sphere turn to mesic community. Always. Okay. Process of succession in hydrosphere, which we will be learning with the help of next video. Thank you for listening.